this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and this is a beginner's tutorial on arrays in Java. And in the last tutorial I actually said that we would look at classes and objects this time, but I completely forgot about arrays, so this time it's going to be the first of several tutorials in which we look at arrays. So just to recap, I can create a variable that can hold an int like this. Let's say int values equals 7. And there's a really important distinction that we need to make now between value types and reference types in Java. The anatomy of what's going on here is that when I type int, which is a primitive type in Java with a lowercase letter here, I actually mean create enough memory to hold an integer, 32 bits to be precise, and here I'm saying and put some value into that memory. So this is like a bucket that's big enough to hold an integer. Now I can actually create a variable that can refer to a whole list of integers by saying int array values, and again I'm just choosing an arbitrary name here and I'm calling it values with an S instead of value, because there's going to be more than one of them. But that's, I could call this not plucker or whatever I liked. And now the anatomy of this is quite different here, because this does not actually hold any integers. It can't. It can merely refer to a list of integers. So when I type this, it's not like creating a bucket, it's like creating a label. Technically this is a value type, a value variable, and this is a reference type, a reference variable. This is a reference, this is a value. And now the next step, of course, is I want to actually allocate some memory which I can put some integers into. So I can say values equals new int array, and in these square brackets which represent the array, I can type the number of integers that I want values to refer to. I'll say, for example, 3. And what's going on here is I'm saying point this reference at this stuff, and this stuff uses the new keyword to actually allocate some memory, and the amount of memory that I'm allocating is enough to hold 3 integers. Now you might be wondering, okay, what are these integers, because I'm not actually referred to any values. Okay, here's a value, but where are the values here? There aren't any. Well, if I can refer to the first integer in this list of integers, this array of integers technically, by saying values, and then I open a square bracket, and Eclipse is putting the closing square bracket for me automatically, and in there I type the number in the list that I want to refer to, and the values are numbers starting at 0. So usually when you number a list yourself, you start at 1, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but usually in programming the first in the list starts at 0. And by the way, that creates what we call the off by 1 problem, which is that if you have a list of 3 things, the first one will be 0, and so the last one is number 2. And it's the same kind of problem that we have with centuries, because the first century started at year 0, and so the 20th century starts at 1900, and every year in the 20th century starts with 19, which can be a little confusing. Same problem here. So if I run this program now, I actually get 0, because Java, unlike C++ for instance, is kind enough to give all values in arrays a default value. But of course I can put my own values in there. I can say values 0 equals 10, let's say, and if I now display that values 0, then I get 10. And you're still seeing the original value here before I changed it. And we could print out values 1, and of course the last value is values 2, and these values that I haven't set yet are going to be, of course, 0, but I can set them. I can say values 1 equals, I don't know, 20, values 2 equals 30. And if you try to refer to values 3, you'll get your program will crash with a handy exception that will tell you that you've done something wrong, which is quite handy, because C++ would just fail silently, but Java is good enough to warn you if you refer to a value that's actually outside the list. Now, some other things you can do with arrays. So here we've looked at setting values and getting values. And another really common thing to do is that you want to iterate through the array. That means go through each value in turn. And I'm going to show you just one way of doing that here using a for loop. And in the next tutorial, we'll look at another way of doing it. So what you do is you say, let's have a loop variable. I'll call it I, and I'll set it to 0 to start with. And I want the loop to keep looping until I is equal to the 1 less than the last value in the array. So in Java, the size of an array can be found by referring to the .length variable. Each array knows how long it is in Java, and the number of values in the array is stored in this .length variable, and then I'll increment I every time I go around the loop. And now in here, all I have to do is say, let's say sysout values, and I'll put I in the kind of array index brackets here, and then when I run this, it's going to go through each of the values in my array in turn. One last really handy thing that we can do to initialize an array at the same time as declaring it is I can say int array, let's call it numbers, for example, and then instead of allocating the memory and then specifying the values, I can specify the values just in a list in curly brackets here. Let's say, for example, 5, 6, 7, but of course you could have hundreds or thousands of values. And then once again, I'll iterate through them. I'll say I less than numbers dot length, and notice I is never equal to numbers dot length, because numbers dot length will be 3, and if I refer to numbers 3, that will be outside the array, which is no good because the last one in the array has index of 2 because we started numbering at 0. And I'll say here I++ again, and then I'll do sysout again, numbers, and of course you could change the numbers here as well as just accessing them if you wanted. And if I run this, we get 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we're going to look at arrays a bit more next time because it's a big subject, and we've kind of covered a lot of material in this tutorial. We've looked briefly at value and reference variables, and lots of array stuff. And the best thing to do to get your head around this is just to have a play with it yourself and try accessing arrays and creating arrays and changing numbers in arrays. And the next time we'll look at string arrays and another way of iterating through an array. So join me again for tutorial number 11, and until then, happy coding.